Hi everyone, welcome if you're new here. So my name is Clementine and I wanted to create a quick little video showing people who want to learn how to cornrow, how I achieve this quick little hairstyle. I hope you enjoyed the video and let's get to it. As you can see, the front perimeter of my hair is much wider than the back. I am creating 8 braids today, so I started with an even split down the middle of my head. And for the first parting, I like to start from my ears and work my way to the middle. When I part, I try to make sure I section all 4 pieces halfway down to the middle of my head, just to make sure all the squares are even. That way I don't create 3 even sections and then realize I don't have enough hair for the front part, and therefore the fourth cornrow will be skinnier than the rest. And when that's out of the way, I part all the way down. And for my back perimeter, I also make sure the back is evenly divided into 4. Naturally, the front perimeter is going to be wider than the back. And so with that in mind, I know that as my comb goes down, the amount of hair that I take is going to be smaller. Otherwise, I won't have enough for the other 3. I use a trifold mirror from Amazon as my front mirror, and my main bathroom mirror behind me. I position the panels on the trifold mirror until I can see the entire back of my head. At this point, I'm just making sure that my lines are straight and neat, just like I like it. You might have to go back in and perfect the lines a few times, but it really helps to use the trifold mirror to see the back of your head so that you can make it as straight as possible. I also like to check across the width of the parting, so you see me separating the strand into 2 diagonally, and that just helps me to make sure that the width is going to be the same size all across for all 4 braids. The one closest to my ear is going to be smaller, but that's okay. And here again, I'm just perfecting the lines. As you can see, when I first parted it, it was just too small, and it just had too much hair for the fourth. So I just made sure that I just grabbed a little bit more hair and perfected it. Alright, so now that you see me parting, we're gonna zoom in real close. So I'm gonna start with the medium size section just to go over the basics. So I like to count 1, 2, 3. So starting with this front section of my hair, I just want you to section your hair into 3, and I want you to make those sections even. I'm gonna carve out this section, and I'm gonna carve out this section. So these are 3 strands of equal quantity. Now, because we're dealing with the perimeter of my hair, some parts of my hair are less or more sparse than the others. So even if your part it looks bigger, that's okay. I just want it to be of equal quantity, and I'll show you what I mean about that by that later. But just grab 3 sections, just 1, 2, 3. And we're gonna use our thumb and our middle finger. So grabbing number 3, this is number 3, right? So we're gonna grab number 3 with our middle finger and our thumb, and we're gonna bypass number 2 with our pointer finger. So we're gonna bypass number 2, and when you're bypassing number 2, don't bypass it with your pointer finger down, bypass it over. So we're gonna take number 3 with our thumb and our middle finger. We're gonna bypass number 2 with our pointer finger, and we're gonna grab number 1 with our pointer and our thumb. And once you bypass number 2, number
2 becomes number 1. So you're gonna move it to the side. And now you're gonna have number 1. So number 2 becomes number 1. So you're gonna bypass number 1. So this is number 1 now. So the same principle applies. You're gonna take number 1 with your thumb and your middle finger. You're gonna bypass number 2 because this is now number 2, right? This was number 1, now it's number 2. You're gonna bypass number 2, and you're gonna grab number 3 with your pointer and your thumb. And now number 3, number 2 again becomes number 3. In the same principle, you grab number 3 with your thumb and your middle finger, and you're gonna bypass number 2, holding this down. Bypass number 2, and now you're gonna grab number 1. And that's really it. That's how you braid, right? So you're gonna grab number 3, bypassing number 2, and you're gonna, number 2 becomes number 3. Bypass number 2, bypass number 2, bypass number 2, bypass number 2. And that's how you create a braid, right? And there's a braid. So this is the same principle that applies when you're going to be cornrowing. So I'm going to take out this. So that little bypassing that we're doing with number 2 is how we're going to be creating a braid when we cornrow. So I'm going to comb out my hair, and we're going to start with the smallest section possible. So we're going to I started with a very big section the first time with this section, but to create a very tight braid, which is what we're going to be doing, we want to grab the smallest section possible. Now this is what I mean by the perimeter of your hair is quite, if it's quite sparse, each strand might not be you want to make sure each strand has the same quantity of hair. So if number 1 is a little bit more sparse because this section of your hair is smaller, you just want to grab a little bit more hair and make sure that it's even. So now number 1, 2, and 3 are a little bit harder to see, but we still have 3 strands. So we're gonna grab number 1 with our thumb and our middle finger, and we're gonna go bypass number 2 with our pointer, and we're gonna grab number 3. So now number 2 becomes number 3. We're gonna bypass number 2, but this time, because we're cornrowing this time, we're gonna bypass number 2, but we're gonna grab extra hair from the back. And now number 2 has a little bit more hair, and number 2 becomes number 1. So next time we're going to bypass number 2, we're going to grab more hair from the back and add it on to number 2 we have. So we're going to use our pointer to just grab hair, and then number 3 becomes number 2, and then number 2 becomes number 3. And if it gets a little bit tangled up front, that's why I kind of combed it out when I first started. But if it gets tangled, just break it off and just continue. So I want to bring your attention back to the hair. The difference between this hair, or this braid, versus this braid is the tightness of the braid. So when you're braiding, the more bypasses you do, the tighter the braid. So you want to make sure you bypass number 2 and grab more hair more frequently if you want a tighter braid. So I'm going to take this off and I'm going to show you what I mean. And I'm going to do the same method, but this time I'm not going to grab as much hair. So if I just grab 3 strands, 1, 2, 3, I bypass number 2, and I grab a big chunk of hair, and I bypass number 2, and I grab a big chunk of hair, my braid is not going to be as tight as it was the first time. So there I did about, I don't know, 5, 6 bypasses. So as you can see, this braid is very tight and this braid is very loose. So if you want it to be, the braids to be tighter, you want to grab hair more frequently. The last thing to keep in mind while you're braiding is you want to braid, you want to keep in mind the direction of the braid, and you want to keep your braid centered. Well, as you can see, this braid is more to this side versus this braid is in the middle, all the way down. So if you see this braid, because we're comparing these two, because they're the same size of my head, this braid is not in the middle, but this braid is in the middle. So the way to achieve a centered braid is you want to just braid, you want to keep in mind the direction your hand is moving. So when I braid, and I braid off to this side, trying to keep my middle part. So when I look at this braid, to compare these two, this braid lands in the center of the part versus this braid lands more on this side instead of being in the center. So now that my hair is all parted, I'm actually going to start the feeding cornrows. So the materials I'm going to be using. So this hair is pre-stretched from Sensational to slick my front down when I need to. I'm going to be using Shine and Jam. I think the most important thing here is to keep in mind that you want to feed in braids in threes. So the same way that you have 1, 2, 3 strands, you want to create the same strands with the hair, and you want to make sure that you feed in the same quantity of hair in threes. So I'll explain visually. So my first set of threes all have to be the same size. My second set of threes can be a little bit bigger than the first one, but all three have to be the same size. And the next set of three has to be the same size. It can be bigger than the first 2 sets, but all 3 have to be the same size. So that way, when I finish my braid, I'm at the end of the braid, my strand is all equal and it's all the same size. And that's very important. Usually when I do feeding cornrows, I usually feed in hair 9 times. So I do 3 sets, gradually increase the size each time, but again, all 3 are all the same size. A quick pro tip, once I start feeding in hair, or once I start parting my extra hair, I always make sure to keep 1 prototype or 1 sample, just because I want each braid to be the same size. So I'm gonna keep these 2 are the same size, so I'm gonna keep 1 off to the side, and I'm gonna work with this. So every time I create 1 bunch for 1 braid, I'm gonna make sure that it's the same as this sample size, and I'm gonna part this in 9. So I'm gonna create 9 parts. I'm gonna create 3 parts first. So my first part is gonna be the smallest, and I'm gonna divide these not perfectly in half, but so as you can see here, this is the smallest, this is slightly bigger than the first, and then this is the biggest. So these are going to be my 3 strands. So I'm going to divide this into 3, divide this into 3 and divide this into 3. So now I'm gonna have 9 parts. These are 3 of all equal sizing. 1, 2, 3, all the same sizing. And this is gonna be my first 3. It's gonna be 1, 2, 3, all equal sizing. Just a quick tip before we start braiding our hair. So if this is my first strand of hair, you want to make sure that you're feeding it in from the middle. So if this is the full length, you want to make sure you're pinching it from the middle, not from a quarter, so that one strand is not shorter than the other. So you want to go from the middle so that the strands is going to be equal at the end. Because what happens sometimes is if you pinch from one side more than the other, your braid at the end, each braid might all be different sizes. And sometimes that's okay if I will have hair that I want to be a little bit longer than I bought. However, if you want your braids to be all the same size, it's important just to remember to pinch from where the strands are going to be even at the end of your braid. Because if this is my first and this is my 2, these are the 2 other ones. If I pinch from here and this is shorter than the rest and these are all the same size, when I get to the end of my braid, this strand is going to be much smaller than the rest of the other 2 strands. And it might not be a big deal because at the end you can just redistribute the hair and make sure that at the end is still even, but it just makes more sense to feed it in the correct way so you don't have to fix it, but there is a way to fix it. Okay, so we've gone ahead and did about 6 cornrows, so we're gonna do the last 2 on camera. I blow dried my hair before I got started. I'm going to be using this shining jam, so this just helps to sleek down my hairs a little bit. Other side, comb it out a little bit so that it has a chance to sort of not all be clumped together. That's an extra step. You don't necessarily have to do that. Initially, I started it with 3 sets of 3, but when I did the first one, it was just a little bit too heavy, so I went down to 4 sets of 3. Again, this is going to be the smallest piece that I'm going to be starting with, and I'm going to divide this into 3. I'm going to show you how I start my feeding process. And it's the same as just when you cornrow, it's just this time you're feeding in braids. So when you're feeding in hair, you're doing it one at a time. But you want, because your hair is sort of divided into 2 strands, even though it's one piece, you want all 3 strands to still come together to make one strand. Starting with the first part or the first section, you want to make this as small as you can grip, and then part into 3, bypass number 2, grab number 1, and then before you finish the braid, just hold on to it, hold on to number 3 with your pointer, and then here you're going to add the braid. So you add it onto your pointer, and then this is number 2. I'm going to carry number 2, bypass number 2, and then now number 2 becomes number 1. And then you're going to hold it down, and now your pointer finger is now holding number 3. So you're going to bring this strand and then you're going to put it into your pointer finger. So now this is what I mean by they're going to be separated. So this strand and this strand are in 2 different places right now, because this strand is now currently number 1. This strand is currently number 1, and this strand is currently number 3. So you see how they're separated, but they have to all come together at the end. So we're gonna put this strand, this is our second strand of the same set of 3. We're gonna put this in the same pointer finger as this. So these are gonna be this now, even though they're from different strands, they now make one, because you want one strand for each 3-strand braid. I hope that makes sense. So you're gonna put this into the same, this and this now belong in the same number 3. And then we're gonna take number 2, bypass number 2. Now this number 2, I'm gonna grab number 1 and braid, and now this is now number 3, and then you want to add the second strand for number 3, and you want to braid, bypass number 2, and then this goes into become number 3. So now each strand has 2 strands. So this is 2 different strands that came together to make one strand. This is 2 different strands that came together to make one strand, and then these were 2 different strands that came together to make one strand. So you want each strand to have equal number of hair, so equal number of strands. And in the same way, you're just gonna keep on adding more hair. So you're gonna take this. I usually like to hook it on with my pinky, but you don't have to. You can just put it in if you're a professional. But I need a little bit more support from my pinky, so I just hook it in with my pinky and I let that guide me when I put it in to number 3. When I braid, I bring it forward, and then I connect this to number 3. So the first number 3 now has 1 strand, but when I add a second braid, it just connects. Don't know if that makes sense, but hopefully visually it makes better sense than me explaining it verbally. So this is my 3rd strand for the second set, and then I just keep on adding here. You keep on going in size, so this strand is obviously bigger than the first strand we started with, because you want that gradual increase. And while I do this, I just add on more hair, like more of my natural hair, while I braid, because I want to keep on gradually adding my natural hair as I go down the braid. And while braiding, I forgot to mention it's important to try as best as you can to keep your braid centered, because sometimes I braid, I tend to like go off to the side, and therefore my braid ends up more of this side and this side. So you want to make sure you keep your braid centered so it lands in the middle. At this point, to make my hair a little bit less bumpy, because I have a lot of hair in the middle of my head, I just skip adding braid here or adding more hair here until I get to the back. So I'll do about maybe 2, 3, 2, this is number 2, and then 1 more, 3, before I add on more hair, because I don't want it to be too bumpy again, because I want a gradual increase. So this is my last set of 3. And I'm going to turn around so that you can actually see what I'm doing. Also important just to try and tuck your natural hair as best as possible. So this is my natural hair, and I don't want it to be upward facing, so I want it to be at the bottom so it does not show on top. So I just want to take my hair, and if it comes on top, I just want to take it and tuck it behind so that it's out of the way and actually inside the braid and away from the top. Okay, so I'm going to zoom out a bit and I'm going to show you at this point. So when you get to this point where it's just braiding, if a strand ends up being shorter than the rest, you just kind of want to redistribute your hair. So by taking hair from one of the strands and adding it on to the shorter strand. But you don't want to do this in a way that's so jarring. You want to just do it gradually. So and I'll show you what I mean by that. So for this hair, this is the hair that's just a little bit too short, and when I add, if I want to add hair to this strand, I'm not going to take hair from this one to add to that one, even if it's longer. So I'm just gonna wait till this comes to this and then add hair. So if this strand is the shortest strand and you wanna add in more hair from this to this, so you just wanna kind of gradually braid as usual, and you wanna take hair, because you're still trying to add to this one, I'm gonna take hair from the closest braid to it, or the closest strand to it, and we're just gonna add in hair, small pieces to start. So gradually add in hair, remembering this is the braid we want to add in more hair to. It's still here, so I'm not gonna take hair from here and add it on. So let's call this number 3, 2, 1. 1, 2, 3. I'm not gonna take hair from number 3 and add to 1, because it just doesn't make sense, because you want it to like flow seamlessly. So we're gonna wait till number 3 is number 1 is beside number 3. So this is still the hair we want to add onto. Now we're in the position to add in more hair. So now this comes here. I can take hair from here and I can add it onto this, because it just flows a little bit more seamlessly. So if this strand was way smaller than the rest, the braid just wouldn't be as cohesive. So I'm going to show you an example of what I mean. You see how this strand is way smaller than this one? Do you see how this braid and this braid, the difference? So this braid is evenly distributed, where this braid is a little bit more wonky, and we don't really want that. So we want it to be, all strands to be even. So I'm going to take this out and I'm going to keep on braiding. So that's a much better look than the first. And we're going to do the last braid. And here I just want to emphasize why it's important to start off your braid gradually. And I'm going to use this much larger piece and create another 3. just as an example of what could happen if the hair you're adding in early on is just too big. This is the braid. It's not as flat or smooth as these braids, which is not a bad look. It just really depends on the type of look you prefer. So I prefer much flatter braid versus a bumpier braid. So that's why I do more of a gradual increase. But if you prefer the look of this, you can still rock it. And also I find that my hair or the extension actually starts somewhere over here because it's pulled back, versus it might start earlier if it's smaller. And here is where tucking matters. So this is my natural hair. I'm gonna move it underneath and try to bring the extensions forward to the top. So my natural hair is not on top, it's going to be underneath as much as possible, at least.
And despite all that emphasis on tucking, you might still see your natural hair peeking through. It's not going to be perfect, except your hair texture matches perfectly with the extensions. If you have hair like mine, it's possible that it still might peek through, and over time, especially if you're sleeping and you don't sleep with a bonnet, the friction against your pillow, it will cause more of your natural hair to show up over time.
Lastly, by the time I get to the end, instead of braiding all the way to the end, I just split one of the middle ones in two to make a twist. And as you twist, just sort of roll the hair and roll the hair the opposite direction. So I'm rolling this one this way and I'm rolling this one outwards, inwards, outwards, and then twisting. But this part is not as relevant. Just for some styling tips, I like to just trim the ends and dip it in hot water so that it's falls easier and it's smoother. And I like to just trim off some of the excess. So yeah, I hope you find this video helpful. If you have any questions for me, let me know down in the comments. And also, if you have any tips for me, let me know. I try to show as best as I can how to do feeding cornrows if you're a beginner, and also how to just do regular cornrows. But yeah, I hope you find this video helpful. Okay.